So this is just a little hand diagram that to help you remember the 5 steps. So we want to, if you want to say them with me, identify, bring them to God, ask God to reveal any roots, receive His perspective, and apply it. And these here, it's on your handout too. I think it's on about page 7. Thanks. Questions to ask God as you're praying for someone would be some here. And keys, we'll look at keys later. I like to think in terms of keys. And instead of let's remember a whole ton of stuff, it's like, how can we sort of mind map this thing? And okay, well, I'm remembering forgiveness. Okay, here's a couple keys I want to remember. This looks like a vow. Here's a couple keys. And it's just a lot easier that way, for me anyways. And then what might be a good thing to bring to God in prayer now? What can we take captive? We'll look a little bit more at that later. This is the just, again, in its simplistic form, because we're after following God, and so this is just an attempt at some sort of generalization, but that it will change depending on what you're specifically doing. But this we talked about identifying, and what are we identifying? Feelings, thoughts, false beliefs. I'll say a word about that. Things like, well, I'll tell you one of my early ones was, life goes better when you're afraid. I learned that when I was about 2 years old, I believe, and had a parent who struggled with anger and was working on it. And my theory, I didn't feel the need to ask him, but because it was more about my interpretation, and I got a lot of freedom praying through it, and that's what I was looking for, so I was happy. But my theory was that when he got angry and I got scared, he stopped. And so it worked. Life went better when I was afraid. That's not, so useful anymore. But that's a false belief. It felt true. And it was the best I could conclude at that point in time. But when I prayed through that memory, and God brought His perspective into that, He showed me that in actuality, He was a cone of light over me, protecting me. I just couldn't see it. So my conclusion, I need to protect myself by being scared, was an incomplete conclusion based on incomplete data. So as I saw more of His reality, that He's the cone of light over me, then I could rest in Him and hide in Him instead of trying to hide from. Okay, so bringing those, so that was a thought about false beliefs. So then we're bringing it all to God, asking for the recent memory. Again, the feelings, thoughts. That would say / false beliefs, except it didn't fit. So it's not an intentional omission. And actions, ask Him to reveal any roots, the first memory or pattern, feelings, thoughts, false beliefs, actions. Receive His perspective, His truth, and the first memory or pattern, the recent memory. You always want to test this by Scripture. Apply this perspective, first memory or pattern, recent memory, and in your life now and the future. So I have felt that gentleness in the wholeness prayer. I learned that God loved me when I had pneumonia and was getting better. I am really glad I learned that. But wholeness prayer has been a way to learn things before the truck hits the wall, It's gentle. Okay, some sample prayers. We won't go into these a whole lot, but on page 9, I believe. Is that correct? Okay. On page 9, you've got some sample prayers in each one, and I just put these here because sometimes, you know how it is when you talk about something and then it still doesn't make any sense to people because they need something a little more concrete. And so I just wrote these down because it actually is, this is about how long I pray. I'm not praying big, long paragraphs or pages in between each time the person's listening to God. I'm praying a simple sentence or two. The opening prayer is a little bit longer because I'm asking God to do things like move aside powers and principalities and It's sort of like what I did, at the beginning of this session, accomplish all he wants to, lead the time, those kinds of things. But in general, like, my first thing is something like, God, will you show this person what's on your heart and their heart for you to talk about today? And then I'd be quiet. One sentence. And then wait. And then ask them after a little bit, does anything come into mind? See what they've got. And I'll tell them, along the wholeness prayer process, oftentimes the first thing that comes to mind is the next one to take to the Lord. So these are just some samples for each of those ideas. Do you have any questions so far? Yes?
What do you do if the person says, well, nothing came to mind?
Okay. Then I would probably, if it was the initial, what do they want to talk about? I would probably ask them, say, well, okay, that's fine. Can you tell me why you came today? And let's use that.
What if it's further on?
It would depend where it is. Yeah, if they, basically looking for what the block is. It's related with hearing God, and I'll tell you this right now too. I have this little booklet. There's a condensed version in your booklets there in the back on growing and hearing God. This is the more complete version that I put together, just of some various hindrances. Things like unforgiveness and occult stuff is going to keep people from hearing. DID might get in the way, but that's more extreme. Other things that might get in the way are people that just plain aren't connected with their feelings. And there's something in the back about connecting with your feelings. There's something a little bit more complete online. What I've found really helpful when that's the issue is talking to the person about how it often feels like our only choice is to leave the door shut or open to our feelings. But what about asking Jesus to be the screen door? And everybody so far that I've talked to really likes that idea. And I really like that idea. I mean, it feels peaceful. I had a guy say to me once, I'm not going to feel, because if I do, I am so angry, I'm afraid I'll kill somebody. And it's like, okay, well, that's good. But let's look at another alternative. And that gentleness, I think of, oh, God could be the screen door. Healthy boundaries, just let in and out good things. And would you like to ask God to do that? Yeah. Sometimes there's vows that are in the way. Yeah. So it depends what it is, but that's a short answer. Okay, cool. All right, I think we are, well, let me ask you first, before we do the next skit that's going to show, and again, this is condensed, although sometimes it does happen this fast. Depends on the person, how familiar they are. But any other questions before we do the next part of the skit? Okay.